Good morning everyone, I'm Gerard Botha. In this video we will start to look in more detail at the municipal processes in section 2. We will specifically look at steps 1, 2 and 3, from application up to budget quote being issued. So I'm adding something new now, before step 1, just a few comments, and then we will look at each of the steps. Of course, we do still end with a summary. So before we look at steps 1, 2 and 3, let us look at the flowchart again. So steps 1, 2 and 3 deals with the information pack, the application, the evaluation, the quotation, up to the point where the customer accepts. Now take a moment and think which of these three steps would be the most time consuming. It's the evaluation of the application. So is there something that the municipality can do to ease the process? The evaluation is done via grid impact studies to see if the network can accommodate the generator. What is necessary to do these grid impact studies? Well, one of the key requirements is the network data, preferably already in a simulation model of the distributor's network. The ideal scenario is to determine a general idea of how much generation can be connected, where in the network, during the long-term planning process or the development or master planning process. The process to determine how much generation can be connected and where in the network is called a hosting capacity study. The definition of hosting capacity is the amount of embedded generation that can be added to the distribution system before system upgrades or control changes are required to safely and reliably operate the network after addition of more EG. The hosting capacity depends on many factors, such as where it is installed and what the capabilities of the EG is, for example control settings and the presence and planned use of battery storage. This is linked to the master planning process, since normal evolution of the network, extensions and strengthening of the network implies that the hosting capacity will also change. Ideally, the distributor should do the hosting capacity analysis on a regular basis, so that at least the first evaluation can be done quickly and without significant resource requirements. This would be similar to the NRS 097-2-3, where simplified criteria can be determined per area of the network for ease of assessing and evaluating applications in step 2. Originally, many people started the application process with NERSA, probably due to the licensing requirements. However, in terms of the distribution network code, the application process should be done directly with the NSP or distributor. The network code also requires that the customer connection information guide be given to the customer at the time of making the application. Examples of many of the documents are already available on the SSEG support website. Step 1, which can be done electronically, is therefore the information pack that also contains the connection application form as well as an invoice for the application fee. The network code stipulates that this guide or information pack shall cover as a minimum the process to follow when applying for supply at the specific distributor, the information requirements of the distributor from the customer to effect an appropriate connection, as well as the process and related timeframes which follow the application. The proposed contents of the information pack are as follows. Firstly, the guideline for municipalities on processing embedded generator applications larger than 1 MW, which guides the customer on the process. Then for information on what's required, the application form, and examples of applicable agreements, which as a minimum would be the connection and use of system agreement, self-build agreement, should the customer be required to build infrastructure within the municipal area, the wheeling agreement, once again if applicable, and this may be embedded into the KIOSA, the distribution network code, which provides the requirements from the grid code perspective, and other applicable technical, legal, financial, and operational agreements. Applicable tariff structures should also be supplied, grid impact study information or specification and requirements, the grid code compliance requirements, which are contained in the RPP grid code, the policy regarding the allocation or reservation of hosting capacity space on the network. So that is who comes first and gets that capacity. Timeframes should be based on NRS 047. And finally, there should be reference to the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the related regulations, as well as the wiring code. Eskom calls the application fee a cost estimate fee. It is based on the labor rates and estimated hours to prepare a cost estimate. This of course differs for different sizes of generators. The cost estimate fees for 2022-23 are shown, and these are updated annually. The latest update of the Eskom application form is now electronic, and for small-scale embedded generators it's found at this address, and for generators larger than 1 megawatt at the following address. Let's quickly look at the checklist. Now for step 1, it is very short and sweet. 3 questions. Has the full information pack, forms and application fee invoice been sent to the customer? Has the application been received and complete? And finally, has the application fee been paid? And that is step 1. On this slide, we have a flowchart of the evaluation process. You will also see that there are some numbers. So D1, for instance, means that you can find more information in Appendix D, Section 1 or 2 or 3, and the evaluation process is discussed in Section 2.2. The simplified connection criteria, Section 2.2.1, and that is based on the hosting capacity study. So following this process, if it meets the simplified connection criteria, you have done a hosting capacity analysis, meets it, you can issue the cost estimate letter very easily. If it doesn't, then one would look at a more detailed grid impact study. So the Appendix D is the guideline at the moment on how to do these grid impact studies. It is being updated. If it passes the grid impact study, so there is no issues detected, then you can also issue the cost estimate letter. If not, you have to look at possible strengthening options so that the network can accommodate this generator, and you will use this then to issue the cost estimate letter. If the customer accepts this, you can go on to the next step, which is actually step 3 already, in doing the network strengthening study, which includes comparison of alternatives to issue the budget quote. There are also other aspects in section 2.2 to evaluate, and that's the impact on maintenance, the power quality and the protection. There is also a proposal for acceptable network impact, which is evaluated during the grid impact studies. This starts with the steady state requirements, that's voltage regulation, which is a statutory requirement, and then thermal loading is protecting your equipment. Fault levels, one should look at things like the network protection is there coordination, equipment ratings during faults, the effect on neighboring customers, as well as the withstand capability of the protection equipment itself. Voltage changes during the network normal conditions, since in low voltage systems and urban medium voltage systems one can expect to find quite a number of these generators. The voltage changes per individual generator should be limited to a low value. In rural medium voltage systems and HV, these generators are more dispersed and further apart, and the impacts of voltage changes from any single generator would start to cancel out, and therefore a higher voltage change is accepted. For dispatchable generators, that can go up to 5% because the risks of fluctuating power output is much less. These are based on international guidelines and implementations and was also used by Eskom. Now, during network contingencies, slightly higher voltage changes can be accommodated because even the NRS 048 does allow for worse performance during network contingencies. If you have feedback into the network, at LV the recommendation remains that it's below 75% of the transformer rating due to the potential impact of DC and especially harmonics on the transformers. Distribution transformers are not designed for harmonics. So if you consider a higher feedback into an LV network, discuss that potential impact with a transformer supplier. At medium voltage, one would look at all these impacts probably at a higher voltage level up to make sure that the entire network remains operationally in a good condition. So the output of the step 2 evaluation is the cost estimate letter. Now note that this is only indicative and usually doesn't evaluate the impact of potential other generators that's also applying at the same time. The reason for keeping this separate from the budget quote is that you can usually follow a more simplified process and just say, well, this is what it's probably going to cost. Only if the customer is serious and he's prepared to actually pay the cost that's implied should you go forward and do a network strengthening study. Up until then, if you go through the entire process to issue the budget quote, you might spend a lot of effort and resources that would be wasted because it is too expensive for the customer, or he would much rather look at a different option. Another question which arises is who does these studies? And it's primarily because many of our municipal distributors do not have the in-house capabilities, or even the software for that matter. So the first prize is to do it in-house. You would have your network, you have this simulation software, and you have people who understands and knows their network. Second option is to have it outsourced to probably whoever does your network planning studies, your master planning studies. But another option is to have the customer do this. The key thing here is to make sure that a professional person signs off on this customer studies, just to make sure that there is no conflict of interest. So to summarize the evaluation process, step 2, the distributor would undertake the grid impact study, especially if a hosting capacity study hasn't been done. They would also undertake the short circuit studies, evaluate the protection coordination, do the power quality apportioning and expected resonance screening, assess the maintenance implications, assess the metering implications, and then issue a cost estimate letter to the customer. The customer then has to accept the cost estimate letter or explore and discuss other options. They also have to acknowledge the protection and power quality parameters and implications for their plant. And as we said just now, many of these studies can also be outsourced to the customer or a recommended consultant. So a big debate at the moment is about reserving capacity. So firstly, the cost estimate letter does not guarantee capacity at the proposed point of connection. The cost estimate letter is meant as an input into the feasibility evaluation for the customer. An example could be also that if another generator applies in the same network and they accept the budget quote first, they would get that capacity first. So that would be a first come first served principle. Eskom has severe network constraints, so they have changed this to a first ready first served principle, where the generator has to show that it's got all relevant authorizations, everything is in place before the budget quote would even be considered. Now, this would also depend on the philosophy that the municipality applies, and in the case of Eskom, because of the number of applications in specific areas, the first ready first served principle makes sense, even though it's very contentious. But in a municipality, you would not necessarily have the same number of customers vying for the same network capacity. So a first come first served principle may still be applicable. That would certainly be the simpler option. Another aspect is the pricing philosophy. So if the distributor has a upgrade plan with cost recovery included already, which will make space available for a specific customer, they might continue in any case and the generator will be able to connect. So the checklist for step 2 on evaluation of the application considers whether the grid impact study has been done, protection, evaluation and coordination, quality of supply has been given to the customer, the maintenance aspects have been evaluated, other considerations, network operations, and finally has a cost estimate letter been issued. Step 3 is the full grid impact study and network strengthening study. This is the last opportunity that the distributor has to make sure that there's no negative impact on their network and to make sure that any equipment that needs to be added is appropriately planned for. So there would be a comparison of alternatives to make sure that the most cost-effective solution is also found. And once again, referring to the pricing policy, one would look at alternatives that has benefit for the entire network. The output is the budget quote. To summarize the step 3, the distributor would issue a budget quote fee invoice to the customer, and that, if the customer pays it, signifies the commitment to the project. Once that's done, the distributor would undertake or outsource the detailed grid strengthening studies, including all the technical and economic approval committees. From there, they can issue a budget quote to the customer, and once the customer has accepted the budget quote, a letter of consent can be issued if there is NERSA registration or licensing required. So the customer has to pay the budget quote fee before the budget quote can be calculated, and also accept the budget quote in writing. So it would appear that the checklist becomes longer with each step. For step 3, the customer has to accept the cost estimate letter and pay the budget quote fee. Has the grid strengthening study been done? And then several internal departments should each sign off to confirm that they have considered this application and either understand the impact, or there is no impact, or they have specified what needs to happen to mitigate the impact on their network. So planning, protection, power quality, maintenance, and other as may be required. Then the budget quote can be issued as well as accepted by the customer before a letter of consent can be issued for registration or licensing applications with NERSA. So to summarize, step 1 is about the application process. It is the forms and the application pack that is given to the customer, the application form that's completed, and the application fee that is paid. Step 2 is the evaluation, where you look at the grid impact studies, consider additional factors, and issue a cost estimate to the customer, which is used for feasibility purposes. Step 3 is the detailed evaluation and all the final checks that this generator will not negatively affect your network. A budget quote is then issued, which the customer has to accept. We will discuss any questions and comments during the Q&A session. If you have not done so, take a minute and jot down the questions you have. Also look for additional information under the Materials tab and prepare for the quiz at the end of the day.